I came home from a 3-week business trip to Denver to find my commercial snow thrower missing from my garage, and the sick feeling in my stomach told me this wasn't going to be a simple case of theft. My name is Wesley Kingman, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Buffalo, New York for 5 years. The neighborhood was nice enough, tree-lined streets with well-maintained homes, but the HOA had become increasingly aggressive over the past year after new board members were elected. The president, a woman named Brenda Hutchins, had made it her personal mission to enforce every microscopic rule in the association handbook, like she was running a military base instead of a residential community. I stood in my garage, staring at the empty space where my Ariens Platinum 30 SHO had been parked. That machine cost me $4,000, and I used it not just for my driveway but also to help clear snow for my elderly neighbors on either side of my property. Buffalo winters were no joke, and that commercial-grade beast could handle the heaviest snowfalls we got off Lake Erie. My neighbor, Tom Rodriguez, was out getting his mail when I walked down my driveway to check if he had seen anything. "Tom, did you see anyone around my house while I was gone?" I called out. He walked over, his face showing genuine concern. "Wesley, man, I was going to text you about that. The HOA had some guys come with a truck about a week ago. They went into your garage and took something big. I thought maybe you had arranged it or something." "Are you serious?" "They just broke into my garage. They had a key or something." The garage door opened normally. Brenda was there supervising the whole thing. She had a clipboard and was barking orders at these 2 guys in coveralls. I did not think much of it because, well, she is always doing something around here. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Did she say anything to you about it?" "No, but she did mention at the last community meeting that they were cracking down on commercial equipment storage. She said something about how residential properties should not have commercial-grade machinery cluttering up the neighborhood aesthetic." I remembered that meeting. I had attended via video call from a hotel in Colorado because my work had sent me out there early. Brenda had gone on a 20-minute rant about maintaining property values and how certain residents were treating the neighborhood like a storage facility. I had not realized she was specifically targeting me. "Thanks for letting me know, Tom. I appreciate it." Back inside my house, I pulled out the HOA handbook and read through the property storage rules. There was nothing specific about commercial equipment. The language was vague, stating that residents should not store items that detract from the aesthetic quality and residential character of the community. Snow throwers were essential equipment in Buffalo, where we regularly got buried under feet of snow every winter. How could owning proper snow removal equipment possibly violate HOA rules? I called Brenda's number, which was listed on the HOA website as the primary contact. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Meadowbrook Heights HOA, Brenda speaking." "Brenda, this is Wesley Kingman from 412 Maple Drive. I just got back from a business trip and discovered that my snow thrower is missing from my garage. My neighbor said the HOA removed it." There was a pause, and I could hear her shuffling papers. "Oh yes, Mr. Kingman. Your property was in violation of Section 12, subsection D regarding commercial equipment storage on residential premises. The item was confiscated and will be returned to you upon payment of the removal fee and storage costs." Confiscated. You broke into my garage and stole my property. That's theft, Brenda. Mr. Kingman, I would advise you to watch your tone. According to your HOA agreement, which you signed when you purchased your property, the association has the right to access your property to remedy violations after proper notice has been provided. What notice? I received nothing. A notice was posted on your front door 14 days prior to removal, as required by our bylaws. We also sent an email to the address on file. I checked my front door and found a faded piece of paper still taped there, barely legible from the snow and weather. The email she mentioned had gone to my spam folder because it came from a suspicious-looking automated address. The whole thing reeked of a setup. Fine. Where is my equipment and how much is this going to cost me? The snow thrower is currently in HOA storage. The removal fee is $500 and storage is $100 per week. Since it has been in our facility for 1 week, your total is currently $600. $600. That's insane. I will come pick it up today. Payment must be made in certified check or money order, Mr. Kingman. We do not accept personal checks for violation remediation fees. Once payment is received and cleared, you will be given 48 hours to retrieve your property. I hung up before I said something I would regret. The whole situation was clearly a shakedown, but I needed to figure out my next move carefully. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything, taking photos of the notice on my door, screenshots of the email in my spam folder, and writing down my conversation with Tom. The next morning, I decided to drive past the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the entrance to our subdivision. It was supposed to be used for community meetings and HOA business, but Brenda had basically turned it into her personal kingdom. Her Mercedes was parked out front, along with 2 other cars I did not recognize. As I was about to leave, something caught my eye. There was a community bulletin board near the office entrance, and someone had posted flyers about a neighborhood marketplace sale coming up that weekend. I walked closer to read the details and felt my jaw drop. Among the photos of various items for sale, I spotted my snow thrower. It was listed as a commercial-grade Ariens Platinum 30 SHO, barely used, selling for $3,000. The contact information listed was an email address, but I recognized the photo because of a distinctive scratch on the side panel that I had gotten when maneuvering it around my garage last winter. They were selling my equipment. I took several photos of the flyer with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. This had gone from an HOA overreach situation to outright theft and fraud. I went home and started researching my options. I could call the police, but I wanted to have everything documented first. I also wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. I created a fake email account and sent a message to the seller asking about the snow thrower. Within an hour, I got a response from someone named Patricia, who identified herself as the HOA Marketplace Coordinator. She said the snow thrower was available for viewing and purchase at the HOA office by appointment. I scheduled a viewing for the next day under my fake identity, giving a different name and saying I ran a landscaping business. Patricia, who I assumed was one of Brenda's cronies on the HOA board, sounded thrilled to have a potential buyer. That evening, I contacted a lawyer friend of mine, Marcus Chen, who had helped me with my house closing years ago. I explained the situation to him over the phone. "Wesley, this is pretty straightforward theft," Marcus said. "The HOA might have some rights to address violations, but they cannot seize your property and sell it. That is not how any of this works legally. Even if you were genuinely in violation, which it sounds like you were not, the proper procedure would be fines and liens against your property, not confiscation. So what should I do? Document everything. Get proof they are trying to sell it. Then we file a police report and possibly pursue civil action. If you can show they have done this to other residents, we might be looking at a pattern of theft and fraud. That is serious criminal territory. I am meeting with them tomorrow to look at the snow thrower, pretending to be a buyer. Record that meeting if New York allows it. Actually, hold on. I heard him typing. New York is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you are part of. Do it. Get them on record selling you your own property. The next day, I dressed differently than usual, wearing a baseball cap and an old jacket I normally only wore for yard work. I drove my wife's car instead of my truck, which most of the HOA board members would recognize. My wife, Victoria Torres, had stayed behind in Denver for an extra week to visit her sister, so I had her Subaru at my disposal. I arrived at the HOA office at the scheduled time with my phone in my jacket pocket, already recording. A woman in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair and an excess of makeup answered the door. She had that particular look that screamed entitled suburbanite, the kind who asks to speak to the manager at every restaurant. "You must be William," she said, using the fake name I had given. "I am Patricia Morrison, the HOA treasurer and marketplace coordinator. Come in." The office was decorated like a bad attempt at professional corporate space, with motivational posters and fake plants everywhere. My snow thrower sat in a corner, looking exactly as I had left it in my garage. "Beautiful machine," Patricia said, walking over to it. "We acquired this from a resident who was improperly storing commercial equipment. It has barely been used, and as you can see, it is in excellent condition." "How did you acquire it exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The homeowner was in violation of HOA regulations. When violations are not remedied, we have the authority to remove the offending items. This particular resident had not paid the associated fees, so the property became available for sale. So the original owner just gave up on a $4,000 machine. Patricia smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. Some people do not understand that living in a managed community comes with responsibilities. When you fail to comply with the rules, there are consequences. And how much of the $3,000 goes back to the HOA? All proceeds from violation-related sales go into the Community Improvement Fund, which benefits all residents. She said this like she was doing everyone a favor. I pretended to examine the machine, bending down to check the auger and the engine. Everything was exactly as I had left it, including the full gas tank. I had even topped it off before leaving for Denver, wanting it ready for when I returned. I will be honest with you, Patricia. I am very interested, but I need to check with my business partner before making a purchase this size. Can you hold it for me for a day or two? Her smile faltered slightly. We do have other interested parties. I would hate for you to miss out. I understand, but this is a significant investment. How about I give you a deposit? Would $200 hold it? She brightened at that. That would be acceptable. Let me write you a receipt. I paid her in cash and got a handwritten receipt that said deposit for snow removal equipment, $200, non-refundable. She signed it with her full name and title. As I was leaving, another woman arrived and I recognized her immediately. Brenda Hutchins was even more imposing in person than she seemed at community meetings. She was tall, probably close to 6 feet, with short dark hair and a permanent expression of disapproval etched into her features. "Patricia, I need to speak with you about the Henderson property," she said, barely glancing at me. "This gentleman was just leaving. He has put a deposit on the Aryans." Brenda's eyes focused on me then, and I saw a flicker of something, maybe suspicion, cross her face. "I do not believe we have met. Are you a resident of Meadowbrook Heights?" "No, madam. I run a landscaping company in Amherst, just looking for equipment." "I see. Well, I hope you find our pricing competitive." She held the door open for me in a way that was clearly a dismissal. I left and drove around the block before parking and reviewing the recording on my phone. Everything was clear and audible. Patricia had explicitly stated they were selling confiscated property without any mention of the rightful owner having a path to reclaim it beyond what Brenda had told me on the phone. Back at home, I called Marcus again and played him the recording. "This is perfect," he said. "They are not even trying to hide what they are doing. I want you to file a police report today. Bring all your documentation, proof of purchase for the snow thrower, the recording, everything. This is theft, plain and simple." I drove to the nearest Buffalo Police Department station and asked to file a report. The officer at the desk, a young guy named Officer Ramirez, seemed skeptical at first when I explained it was an HOA situation, probably figuring it was some petty neighborhood dispute. But when I showed him the evidence and played the recording, his demeanor changed. "Sir, I am going to need to get a detective involved in this. Can you wait here?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in an interview room with Detective Sarah Okonkwo, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, she reviewed all the photos and documents I had brought. "Mr. Kingman, what you are describing is a clear case of larceny and potentially fraud," she said. "The question is whether this is an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. In my experience, people who are brazen enough to do this once have likely done it before." I had not thought about that, but it makes sense. How would we find out? I am going to need to do some investigation. We will start by getting a warrant to search the HOA records and see what other items they have sold through this marketplace program. I also want to interview other residents. Would you be willing to help facilitate that? Absolutely. My neighbor Tom Rodriguez saw them taking my equipment. He would be willing to talk, I am sure. Good. In the meantime, do not contact the HOA or let them know you have filed a police report. I do not want them destroying evidence. Over the next few days, Detective Okonkwo worked quickly. She obtained a warrant and with a team of officers visited the HOA office to seize records. I heard about it from Tom, who said Brenda and Patricia were both there when the police showed up and seemed shocked that law enforcement was getting involved in what they kept calling a civil HOA matter. The detective called me 4 days later and asked me to come to the station. When I arrived, she had a thick folder of documents spread across her desk. "Mr. Kingman, your HOA has been operating what amounts to a theft ring for the past 18 months, she said. "We found records of over 30 items they confiscated and sold, totaling approximately $80,000 in proceeds. Everything from lawn equipment to outdoor furniture to even a boat." A boat? How did they justify that? Same playbook every time. "They claimed items were in violation of HOA rules, confiscated them while owners were away or unable to respond quickly, charged exorbitant storage fees that no one could afford, then sold the items and kept the money. They were not even putting it into community improvements like they claimed. Brenda Hutchins was paying herself and Patricia Morrison extra salary from what they called the enforcement fund. So what happens now? We are arresting both of them, along with another board member named Craig Feldman who was involved. They will be charged with multiple counts of grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement. Your snow thrower is being held as evidence, but you will get it back once the criminal case is resolved. In the meantime, I suggest you and the other affected residents contact a lawyer about civil action to recover damages. Already ahead of you on that." Detective Okonkwo smiled. "I figured. One more thing. We need you to follow through with the purchase appointment. We want to catch them in the act of completing the fraudulent sale. Are you willing to wear a wire?" 2 days later, I returned to the HOA office, this time with a hidden microphone taped to my chest, and Detective Okonkwo, and 2 other officers waiting in an unmarked van nearby. I had called ahead and told Patricia I was ready to complete the purchase. Patricia greeted me with the same fake enthusiasm as before. Brenda was there too, apparently wanting to oversee what she thought was a successful sale. "William, wonderful to see you again," Patricia said. "Do you have the remaining balance?" "I do, but I have to ask. I did some research, and this model of snow thrower retails for about $4,000 new." "How are you selling it for 3?" Brenda stepped forward. As Patricia explained, this was obtained through a violation remediation. "We price items competitively to ensure quick sales. The goal is not profit but resolution." "Right, but I heard some concerning things. Someone told me these items are being sold without giving the original owners proper chance to reclaim them. Is that true?" Brenda's expression hardened. "I do not know what rumors you have been listening to, but the HOA follows all applicable laws and regulations. Every owner is notified and given ample opportunity to pay the associated fees, even when the fees are deliberately set so high that people cannot afford them." "I think you should either complete this purchase or leave," Brenda said coldly. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording I had running. "Actually, I think I will do neither. My name is Wesley Kingman and you are selling my property." Patricia's face went white. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "This is entrapment," Brenda finally sputtered. "You cannot do this." "Actually, he can," Detective Okonkwo said, walking through the door with the 2 uniformed officers. "Brenda Hutchins and Patricia Morrison, you are under arrest for grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement." The officers moved forward with handcuffs. Patricia started crying immediately, but Brenda remained defiant even as her hands were cuffed behind her back. "You are making a mistake," she hissed at the detective. "We have the authority to enforce HOA regulations. This is a civil matter, not criminal." "Tell it to the judge," Detective Okonkwo said. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they were being led out to the police cars, I finally felt like I could breathe again. Other neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the sight of police vehicles. Tom came jogging over from his house. "Wesley, what is happening?" The HOA board was stealing from residents and selling their property. "The police just arrested Brenda and Patricia." "No way. Are you serious?" "Completely serious." "Detective, is it okay if I tell people what is going on?" Detective Okonkwo nodded. "The arrest is public record. We will be reaching out to other affected residents as part of the investigation." Word spread through Meadowbrook Heights like wildfire. By that evening, my phone was ringing constantly with neighbors wanting to know what happened. Some people were shocked. Others said they always suspected something shady was going on, and a few shared their own stories of the HOA confiscating items or charging outrageous fees. One neighbor, an older woman named Dorothy Chen, called me in tears. "They took my husband's motorcycle last year," she said. "He died 6 months ago and I could not afford their storage fees. They said it was sold to cover the costs, but I never saw any money. That bike was worth $12,000. It was the only thing I had left of his." "Mrs. Chen, you need to call this detective," I said, giving her Detective Okonkwo's number. "They found records of everything. You might be able to get compensation." Marcus helped me organize a meeting for all the affected residents. We gathered in the community center, the same place where Brenda used to hold her dictatorial HOA meetings. 37 families showed up, all with stories of items confiscated and sold or exorbitant fees charged for minor violations. "We are going to file a class action lawsuit against the HOA and the individuals involved." Marcus explained. The criminal case will proceed separately, but we want to ensure everyone gets compensated for their losses and that this kind of abuse cannot happen again. What about the HOA itself? Someone asked. Do we even want to keep it? That will be up to you as residents, Marcus said. You can vote to dissolve the HOA, restructure it with new bylaws, or replace the board with trustworthy members. But first, we need to deal with the immediate legal issues. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Craig Feldman, the third board member involved, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided detailed testimony about how Brenda had orchestrated the entire scheme, convincing him and Patricia that they were simply enforcing HOA rules aggressively, when in reality, they were committing systematic theft. According to Craig's testimony, Brenda had become obsessed with generating revenue for the HOA after property values in the neighborhood stagnated. She felt that her work as HOA president deserved more compensation than the small stipend the bylaws allowed. So she created the enforcement fund as a way to pay herself more while pretending it was all legitimate. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-March, about 6 weeks after the arrests. I attended along with several other victims. Brenda showed up with an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that the HOA's bylaws gave her the authority to take enforcement actions, but the judge was not buying it. Counselor, even if the HOA had broad enforcement powers, which is debatable, there is no provision for personal enrichment, Judge Marion Foster said. Your client was paying herself and others from funds obtained by selling other people's property. That is theft, regardless of how you frame it. Brenda's lawyer tried a different angle. Your Honor, my client believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. There was no criminal intent. The evidence suggests otherwise, the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney James Wu, countered. Miss Hutchins deliberately structured the fee system to ensure owners could not afford to reclaim their property. She timed confiscations for when residents were away. She maintained separate financial records that were hidden from other board members. This was not a good faith mistake. This was a calculated scheme. The judge agreed to move forward with a trial. Bail was set at $50,000 for Brenda and $25,000 for Patricia. Brenda's family posted her bail, but Patricia could not afford hers and remained in custody. During this time, my snow thrower was released back to me from evidence after they had documented and photographed everything. It felt good to have it back in my garage where it belonged, though I had installed new locks and a security system. Several neighbors did the same, worried about retaliation from Brenda or her supporters. Yes, Brenda had supporters. A small faction of residents believed she had been doing the right thing, just executed poorly. They argued that HOAs needed strong enforcement to maintain property values, and that the rest of us were overreacting to what should have been a civil matter. This group, led by a man named Richard Stoltz, tried to organize their own meetings to defend the board's actions. Tom and I attended one of these meetings out of curiosity. It was held at Richard's house, and about 15 people showed up. We cannot let our community fall apart because of this witch hunt, Richard said, standing in his living room like he was giving a TED talk. Brenda was trying to keep our neighborhood nice, so what if her methods were a bit aggressive? That is what we need around here. She stole people's property and sold it, I said, unable to stay quiet. That is not aggressive enforcement, that is criminal behavior. You are just bitter because you got caught violating the rules, Richard shot back. I did not violate any rules. There is nothing in the HOA bylaws about commercial snow throwers, but even if there was, the remedy would be a fine, not confiscation and sale. What Brenda did was illegal, which is why she has been arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The argument went back and forth for a while before Tom and I left. It was clear that some people would defend Brenda no matter what evidence was presented. Fortunately, they were a small minority. The trial began in late April. Buffalo was finally shaking off winter, and the courthouse downtown was busy with the usual mix of criminal and civil cases. The prosecution had a strong case, built on the financial records seized from the HOA office, testimony from victims, and the recordings I had made. I testified on the second day of the trial. The prosecutor walked me through everything, discovering my snow thrower missing, the phone conversation with Brenda, finding it listed for sale, the interaction with Patricia, and finally the sting operation when I returned to complete the purchase. Brenda's lawyer tried to discredit me during cross-examination. "Mr. Kingman, is it not true that you failed to respond to the violation notice posted on your door?" I was out of state on business. The notice was posted while I was gone and was barely legible by the time I returned. But it was posted correct. My client followed procedure. Posting a notice someone cannot possibly respond to while simultaneously confiscating their property is not following procedure in good faith. It is creating a pretext for theft. "Objection. Argumentative," the lawyer said. "Sustained," Judge Foster said. "Mr. Kingman, please stick to answering the questions directly." The lawyer tried another approach. "You recorded conversations with Miss Morrison without her knowledge. Is that not unethical? New York is a one-party consent state." I was legally entitled to record conversations I participated in. I did so because I suspected I was being defrauded, and I was right. Other victims testified over the following days. Dorothy Chen, the widow whose husband's motorcycle was taken, was particularly effective. She brought photos of her late husband with the bike and documented every interaction she had with Brenda trying to get it back. She told me my husband was a hoarder and that I should be grateful they cleaned up my property, Dorothy said, her voice shaking with emotion. That motorcycle was not junk. It was a pristine 1975 Harley-Davidson that my husband restored over 10 years. It was worth at least $12,000, and they sold it for $8,000 without giving me any of the proceeds. Craig Feldman's testimony was damning. He explained how Brenda had initially convinced him and Patricia that they were simply modernizing the HOA's enforcement procedures. By the time he realized what was really happening, he felt trapped and afraid of being exposed. "She told us that if anyone found out, we would all go down together," Craig said. "She made us feel complicit so we would not blow the whistle. But what we were doing was wrong, and I should have stopped it sooner. I am sorry to everyone we hurt." Patricia took the stand in her own defense, which turned out to be a mistake. Under cross-examination, she fell apart and admitted that she knew what they were doing was wrong but went along with it because Brenda was intimidating and she needed the extra money. "Miss Hutchins told me the homeowners were lazy and entitled," Patricia said, crying. "She said they deserved to have their stuff taken if they could not follow simple rules. I believed her. I wanted to believe her because the money helped with my bills." Brenda chose not to testify, which was probably smart given how things were going. Her lawyer tried to argue in closing that she genuinely believed the HOA had the authority to take the actions she did, and that any mistakes were civil matters, not criminal ones. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Brenda guilty on all counts: 15 counts of grand larceny, 8 counts of fraud, and 3 counts of embezzlement. Patricia was convicted on 12 counts of grand larceny and 5 counts of fraud. Craig, as part of his plea deal, pleaded guilty to reduced charges and agreed to testify, receiving probation and community service instead of prison time. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, the civil case was moving forward. Marcus had filed a comprehensive lawsuit on behalf of all affected residents, seeking full restitution for stolen property, punitive damages, and legal fees. The HOA's insurance company tried to argue they were not liable because the board members were acting outside their authority. But Marcus countered that the organization itself had failed in its oversight responsibilities. Eventually, they agreed to a settlement that would compensate all victims for their losses plus additional damages. I received $4,500 for my snow thrower, which was its replacement value, plus compensation for the time and stress of dealing with everything. Dorothy Chen got $18,000 for her husband's motorcycle. Other residents received amounts ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s, depending on what had been taken from them. The HOA itself underwent a complete restructuring. We held a special election where residents voted to dissolve the existing board and create new bylaws with much stricter oversight and limitations on enforcement actions. A new board was elected with Tom Rodriguez as president. He was reluctant at first, but agreed after several of us convinced him he would do a good job. The new bylaws specified that the HOA could not confiscate property under any circumstances. Violations would result in written warnings, fines if absolutely necessary, and in extreme cases, liens against properties, but that was it. We also added requirements for financial transparency, regular audits by an independent accountant, and term limits for board members. Sentencing day arrived in early June. The courtroom was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Heights. Judge Foster reviewed the pre-sentencing reports and victim impact statements before addressing Brenda and Patricia. Miss Hutchins, you held a position of trust in your community, the judge said. People elected you to represent their interests, and you abused that trust in the worst possible way. You systematically stole from your neighbors, many of whom were vulnerable, to enrich yourself. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, ongoing criminal enterprise that you operated for over a year. I have read the victim impact statements, and the harm you caused goes beyond monetary losses. You destroyed people's sense of security in their own homes. You betrayed the trust of an entire community. Judge Foster sentenced Brenda to 6 years in state prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to all victims, which would be coordinated with the civil settlement. Patricia received 3 years and similar restitution orders. Both would be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of their sentences if they demonstrated good behavior. Brenda showed no emotion when the sentence was handed down. She was led away in handcuffs, still maintaining the same rigid posture she had always had during HOA meetings. Patricia was sobbing, apologizing to anyone who would listen. After the sentencing, many of us gathered at a local restaurant to decompress. It had been a long 5 months since I discovered my snow thrower missing, and finally having closure felt surreal. I still cannot believe she thought she would get away with it, Tom said, raising his beer. How arrogant do you have to be to think you can steal from 30+ families and no one will notice? She probably got away with smaller things before and it emboldened her, Marcus said. He had joined us for the celebration. That is how these things usually work. They start with minor abuses of power, and when no one pushes back, they escalate. Dorothy Chen was there too, looking lighter than I had seen her in months. I cannot bring my husband back, but at least his memory has been honored. That motorcycle meant everything to him, and knowing that the people who stole it are being held accountable helps. Thank you, Wesley, for not letting this go. I just wanted my snow thrower back, I said, though we all knew it had become about much more than that. Victoria had returned from Denver a few weeks after everything started, and she had been my rock throughout the whole ordeal. She squeezed my hand under the table. I am proud of you for standing up to them. A lot of people would have just paid the ransom to get their stuff back and moved on. I thought about it, I admitted. But something about the way Brenda talked to me on the phone, so smug and entitled, it just set me off. I knew if I let her get away with it, she would keep doing it to others. The conversation turned to the future of the HOA. Tom laid out his vision for how things would operate going forward. Transparency is going to be our watchword, he said. Every financial transaction gets recorded and reviewed. We will have quarterly meetings where any resident can ask questions and review the books. No more secrecy, no more power trips. We are here to maintain common areas and handle basic community issues, that is it. We are not the property police. Are we keeping the marketplace? Someone asked. The community marketplace, where residents could sell items to each other, had actually been a good idea before Brenda corrupted it. Yes, but with strict rules, Tom said. Only items that genuinely belong to the seller. No HOA confiscations, period. We will vet listings and require proof of ownership for anything valuable. It should be a service to residents, not a way to fence stolen goods. Over the following months, life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal. The neighborhood gained some notoriety from local news coverage of the trial, but eventually, people moved on to other stories. The new HOA board functioned smoothly under Tom's leadership, handling routine maintenance and community events without drama. I kept my snow thrower in my garage, right where it belonged, and used it that winter to clear not only my driveway but also those of Dorothy and several other elderly neighbors. No one from the HOA said a word about commercial equipment or aesthetic violations. One cold Saturday in January, almost a year after everything started, I was out clearing snow when Richard Stoltz approached me. He was one of the few people who had defended Brenda throughout the trial. "Wesley, can I talk to you for a minute?" I shut off the snow thrower. "Sure, what is up?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot in the snow. "I owe you an apology. I said some things during all that mess last year that were out of line. I was wrong." Brenda convinced me and a few others that she was protecting the neighborhood, but after seeing all the evidence at trial, I realized she was just a thief. I am sorry I did not believe you and the others from the start. I had not expected that. I appreciate you saying that, Richard. It takes guts to admit when you are wrong. I talked to Dorothy Chen too and apologized to her. What Brenda did with her husband's motorcycle was unforgivable. I should have seen that at the time, but I was so focused on property values and rules that I lost sight of basic decency. Well, we all learned something from this experience. Hopefully, it makes us a stronger community going forward. He nodded and offered his hand. We shook, and he trudged back to his house through the snow. Later that evening, Victoria and I sat in our living room with hot chocolate, watching the snow continue to fall outside. The house was warm and comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease in my own neighborhood. "Do you ever regret buying a house in an HOA community?" Victoria asked. "After everything that happened?" "Yeah, sometimes. But I also learned that HOAs are not inherently bad. They are just tools, and like any tool, they can be used properly or misused." What Brenda did was not a flaw in the HOA concept. It was a flaw in Brenda, and in the system that gave her too much unchecked power. Profound thoughts from the guy who just wanted his snow thrower back. I laughed. "Yeah, well, it was a really nice snow thrower. The criminal case had some additional developments in the months after sentencing. Patricia, showing genuine remorse and cooperation, was released to a halfway house after serving 14 months of her 3-year sentence. She moved away from Buffalo, reportedly to live with family in Ohio and start over. Brenda, on the other hand, remained as unrepentant in prison as she had been on the HOA board. According to Craig Feldman, who I ran into occasionally at the grocery store, she had sent letters to some residents claiming she was a victim of a vindictive conspiracy and would be vindicated on appeal. Her appeals were denied at every level. Craig himself had completed his community service and paid his restitution. He kept a low profile in the neighborhood, and while people were not exactly friendly to him, they were not hostile either. He had cooperated fully and seemed genuinely remorseful, which earned him some measure of understanding if not forgiveness. The civil settlement was fully paid out by the end of the first year. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, with the remainder coming from the liquidation of assets that Brenda and Patricia had purchased with stolen funds. Brenda's Mercedes was sold at auction, as was a vacation timeshare she had bought in Florida. Patricia had spent most of her ill-gotten gains on basic living expenses, so there was not much to recover from her personally. Tom proved to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, kept everyone informed, and managed to handle the inevitable minor disputes between neighbors without turning everything into a federal case. Under his leadership, the HOA actually became a positive force in the community, organizing neighborhood events, coordinating group purchases of services like snow removal and landscaping to get bulk discounts, and maintaining the common areas without hassling individual homeowners. One particularly satisfying moment came that spring when we held our annual community cleanup day. In previous years under Brenda's leadership, it had been a mandatory event with fines for anyone who did not show up. Tom made it voluntary, and twice as many people participated. We worked together cleaning up the neighborhood parks and common areas, then had a cookout afterward. It was the kind of community building that should have been happening all along. During the cookout, Dorothy Chen approached me with a photo album. "I wanted to show you something," she said, opening it to a page with pictures of her husband on his restored Harley-Davidson. "I got most of my settlement money together with some savings and bought this." She showed me a photo on her phone of a different motorcycle, not as fancy as the one that was stolen but still nice. "My son is going to help me learn to ride it," she said, smiling. "My husband always wanted to teach me, but I was too scared. I figure it is not too late to overcome that fear. And when I ride, I will feel close to him again." "That is beautiful, Dorothy. He would be proud of you. I want you to know that standing up to Brenda gave me courage to do this. If you had just accepted what happened and moved on, I would still be sitting in my house feeling sorry for myself and angry at the world. But you fought back, and you won. That showed me I could fight back too in my own way. So thank you." I did not know what to say to that, so I just gave her a hug. That was the moment when I truly understood the impact of everything that had happened. It was not just about recovering stolen property or seeing criminals punished. It was about people reclaiming their power and their dignity after being bullied and victimized by someone who was supposed to serve them. The story made its way through various homeowner advocacy groups and legal circles. Marcus told me he had been contacted by lawyers in other states dealing with similar HOA abuse cases, wanting to know how we had successfully pursued criminal charges rather than just civil remedies. Apparently, most HOA conflicts stayed in civil court even when they involved theft, because prosecutors were reluctant to get involved in what they perceived as neighborhood disputes. "Your case might end up being cited in law journals," Marcus said when we met for lunch one day. "The recording you made of Patricia explicitly describing how they acquired and were selling confiscated property was the key. It showed clear criminal intent and cut through all the HOA authority arguments. Plus, the fact that Detective Okonkwo found the pattern of systematic theft elevated it beyond a simple property dispute. I am just glad it worked out. For a while there, I was worried they would get away with it. The system worked this time, but you made it work. If you had not been persistent and smart about gathering evidence, they probably would have gotten away with it. Most people do not think to record conversations or conduct sting operations on their HOA board. My experience inspired some legislative action too. A New York State representative from the Buffalo area introduced a bill that would create clearer guidelines for HOA enforcement powers, and specifically prohibit confiscation and sale of homeowner property, except through proper legal channels like liens and foreclosures. The bill was still working its way through committee, but it had bipartisan support. I was even invited to testify before a state legislature committee about my experience. It was surreal sitting in the hearing room in Albany, telling my story to lawmakers while cameras recorded everything for the public record. "The problem is not HOAs themselves," I testified. "The problem is when individuals are given too much power without adequate oversight or accountability. Our HOA now has systems in place to prevent abuse, but those systems came about only after significant damage was done. Legislation that requires transparency, regular audits, and clear limits on enforcement powers would help protect homeowners across the state from similar situations." Several other victims from Meadowbrook Heights testified as well. Dorothy Chen's testimony about her husband's motorcycle was particularly moving, and I saw several committee members visibly affected by her story. The hearing lasted several hours, and by the end, the committee chair indicated strong support for advancing the bill. Life continued to move forward. Victoria and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary that summer with a trip to Maine, enjoying a week away from everything. When we returned, our house and garage were exactly as we left them, with no surprise violations or missing equipment. It was a small thing, but it felt significant after everything we had been through. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new HOA leadership. Property values, which Brenda had been so obsessed with protecting, actually increased as word spread that Meadowbrook Heights had cleaned up its governance issues. Prospective buyers liked seeing an HOA that was transparent and reasonable rather than authoritarian. Tom served 2 years as president before passing the role to another neighbor, Janet Wilson, who continued the same approach. Tom stayed on the board as treasurer, using his background in accounting to keep the finances meticulously organized and transparent. I eventually joined the board myself as a regular member, figuring I had a responsibility to help ensure the reforms we had fought for remained in place. It was not glamorous work, mostly reviewing maintenance bids and planning community events, but it was satisfying to be part of a functional, healthy organization. Brenda became eligible for parole after serving 4 years of her 6-year sentence. Several of us, including Dorothy Chen and Tom Rodriguez, wrote letters to the parole board opposing her early release. I do not know if our letters made the difference, but her parole was denied. She would serve her full sentence. Patricia, on the other hand, had turned her life around after her early release. I heard through the community grapevine that she was working at a nonprofit in Ohio, helping formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society. She had given several interviews about her experience, expressing genuine remorse and using her story as a cautionary tale about how ordinary people can get caught up in criminal behavior when they do not speak up against wrongdoing. Craig remained in the neighborhood, keeping to himself mostly. He had paid his restitution and completed all requirements of his probation. Some neighbors never forgave him, but others, including me, tried to give him a chance to move forward. He was not involved in HOA leadership anymore, which was appropriate, but he did volunteer for community events and tried to be a good neighbor. My snow thrower continued to serve me well through several more Buffalo winters. Every time I fired it up and cleared my driveway, I thought about how close I came to just paying Brenda's extortion fees and letting the whole thing go. It would have been easier in the short term, but it would have enabled her to continue victimizing others. Standing up to injustice is not always convenient or comfortable. It took months of stress, legal meetings, court appearances, and confrontation with people who wanted to defend the indefensible. But it was worth it. Not just for getting my property back, but for helping dozens of other families get justice, and for improving the community for everyone who came after. The snow thrower itself became something of a neighborhood icon. People joked about the famous snow thrower that brought down the HOA. Some neighbors asked to take pictures with it. I played along with the humor, but the machine also served as a reminder of an important lesson. Sometimes a small act of resistance against an unjust authority can snowball into real, meaningful change. 3 years after the initial theft, I was clearing snow on a Saturday morning when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They introduced themselves as prospective buyers looking at a house for sale 2 streets over. "We heard about what happened here a few years ago," the woman said. "With the HOA theft scandal. Is the HOA safe now? We are nervous about buying into a community with that kind of history." I leaned against my snow thrower and gave them an honest answer. What happened here was terrible, but the community responded the right way. We completely restructured the HOA with new bylaws, new leadership, and strong oversight systems. Our current board is transparent and accountable. You can come to any meeting and review the finances yourself. In some ways, we are probably safer than neighborhoods that have never had a scandal because we learned hard lessons and built protections into our system. "That is good to hear," the man said. "The house we are looking at is really nice and the neighborhood seems great. We were just worried." "Come to an HOA meeting before you make your decision," I suggested. "They are the second Tuesday of every month at the community center. See for yourself how things operate now. If you are still not comfortable, that is okay. But I think you will see that we learned from what happened and became stronger because of it." They thanked me and drove off. I did not know if they would end up buying in the neighborhood, but I hoped they would. Good people moving in and staying informed was exactly what we needed to keep the community healthy going forward. That evening, Victoria and I sat on our couch reviewing the family finances, a regular ritual we had maintained for years. As we went through our accounts, I noticed a small deposit I did not recognize. "What is this $200 deposit?" I asked. Victoria checked her notes. "Oh, that is the deposit you gave Patricia for the snow thrower. The court ordered her to return it as part of the restitution. It came through last week." I had completely forgotten about that deposit. It was such a small amount compared to everything else that happened, but getting it back felt like closing the final chapter on the whole experience. "Should we do something special with it?" Victoria asked. I thought for a moment. Let us donate it to that nonprofit Patricia works for now, the one helping people coming out of prison. Really, after everything she did, she served her time and is trying to make amends. The organization is doing good work. And honestly, I would rather the money go towards something positive than just disappear into our regular account. Think of it as my contribution to breaking the cycle of recidivism." Victoria smiled. "You are a better person than me, but okay, if that is what you want to do with it." We made the donation that night, including a note explaining where the money came from and that we hoped it would help someone else get a second chance at building a better life. I did not expect a response, but 2 weeks later, we received a thank you card. It was from Patricia. "Dear Wesley and Victoria, I cannot express how much your donation and the spirit behind it means to me. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness or generosity after what I did to you and others. Working with people who are trying to rebuild their lives after making terrible mistakes has given me perspective on my own actions and the grace I have been shown. I will never be able to fully repay the debt I owe to the community I hurt, but I am trying every day to do better and help others do better too. Thank you for seeing me as more than the worst thing I ever did. With deep gratitude and remorse, Patricia." I showed the card to Victoria. "Looks like she really has changed. I hope so, for her sake and everyone else's." The years continued to pass. Brenda completed her full 6-year sentence and was released, immediately moving to Arizona to live with a sister. I heard she was working in retail and keeping a low profile. There were no indications she had learned anything or felt remorse for her actions, but at least she was not in a position of power over anyone anymore. The legislation inspired by my case eventually passed the New York State Legislature, creating what became known as the Homeowner Protection Act. It established clear limits on HOA enforcement powers, required annual independent audits of HOA finances, mandated transparency in all HOA transactions, and specifically prohibited the confiscation and sale of homeowner property, except through proper legal channels. The governor signed it into law, and it became a model for similar legislation in other states. I received a framed copy of the bill's signing ceremony photo from the state representative who had sponsored it, inscribed with "Thank you for your courage in standing up for homeowners' rights across New York." My story had become bigger than just a stolen snow thrower. It became about accountability, community action, and the importance of challenging authority when authority is abused. I gave occasional talks to homeowner groups and law students about the experience, always emphasizing the same key points. Document everything, know your rights, do not be afraid to involve law enforcement when crimes are committed, and remember that change usually requires ordinary people being willing to stand up and fight for what is right. The snow thrower itself kept running strong year after year. I maintained it carefully, changing the oil regularly and storing it properly. It became more than just a tool. It was a symbol of resilience and justice. Some neighbors continued joking that it should be in a museum someday as an artifact of local history. Buffalo winters continued to be brutal, and every time I cleared my driveway with that machine, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood up to Brenda and the corrupt HOA board. Grateful for neighbors like Tom and Dorothy who supported the fight for justice. Grateful for professionals like Detective Okonkwo and Marcus Chen who took the case seriously and helped see it through. Grateful for Victoria, who supported me through all the stress and uncertainty. And grateful for a legal system that, despite its flaws, ultimately worked as it should have worked. The community of Meadowbrook Heights became stronger and more connected than it had been before the scandal. Adversity had forced us to come together, communicate, and rebuild trust. The HOA functioned as it should have from the beginning, as a service organization for residents rather than an authoritarian regime. Neighbors helped each other, participated in community events, and stayed informed about HOA activities without the paranoia and resentment that had characterized Brenda's tenure. On the 5th anniversary of the day I returned from Denver to find my snow thrower missing, the neighborhood held a community celebration. It was not specifically about the HOA scandal, but rather a general appreciation event for the community we had built together. There was food, music, and activities for kids. It was the kind of wholesome neighborhood gathering that Brenda used to mandate as attendance-required events. But this time, everyone came because they wanted to, not because they were threatened with fines. Tom gave a short speech thanking everyone for their participation in making Meadowbrook Heights a great place to live. He did not mention Brenda by name, but he did reference the challenges the community had overcome and how we had emerged better for it. We learned that an HOA is only as good as the people running it and the people holding them accountable, Tom said. We learned that silence in the face of injustice enables that injustice to continue. And we learned that when a community comes together with shared purpose, we can overcome even serious challenges. Here is to continuing to build a neighborhood where everyone feels safe, respected, and heard. People applauded, and the celebration continued. I stood with Victoria, watching kids play on the community playground while adults mingled and enjoyed the early summer evening. This was what community was supposed to feel like. "Any regrets?" Victoria asked, reading my thoughts as she often did. "About what?" "All of it. The fight with the HOA, the stress of the legal case, everything." I thought about it honestly. No, I mean, I wish Brenda had never stolen my snow thrower in the first place. I wish none of us had to go through that ordeal. But given that it happened, I am glad I fought back. I am glad we got justice, and I am glad it led to real, positive change. What would you tell someone else in a similar situation? Document everything. Get evidence. Do not be intimidated by authority figures who are abusing their power. Find allies and work together. And remember that pursuing justice is not about being vindictive. It is about stopping wrong behavior and preventing it from happening to others. If I had just paid the ransom and gotten my equipment back quietly, Brenda would still be out there stealing from people today. Victoria squeezed my hand. "I am proud of you. You could have taken the easy way out, but you did not." As the sun set over Meadowbrook Heights that evening, casting long shadows across the well-maintained lawns and happy families, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. Justice had prevailed, accountability had been established, and a community had been transformed for the better. The snow thrower that started it all sat in my garage, ready for the next Buffalo winter. It was just a machine, a tool for moving snow, but it represented so much more. It represented the principle that people should not be able to abuse positions of trust and authority without consequences. It represented the power of ordinary citizens standing up for what is right. And it represented the difference one person can make when they refuse to accept injustice and are willing to fight for accountability. I never expected that a stolen snow thrower would change my life and my community so dramatically. But sometimes the most important battles begin with the smallest provocations, and the courage to fight those battles can ripple out in ways you never imagined. That is the lesson I learned, and that is the lesson I hoped others would take from my story. Stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when it would be easier to let things go, because that stand might make all the difference for yourself and for others you will never even know about. Years from now, long after the snow thrower itself has worn out and been replaced, I hope the changes we made to the HOA and the precedents we set will continue protecting homeowners in our community and beyond. That is the real victory, the lasting legacy of what began as one man discovering his snow removal equipment had been stolen and deciding he was not going to let it slide. Justice, accountability, community action, and positive change. That is what my stolen snow thrower ultimately gave me, and I would not trade that for anything.